The room felt too small, too suffocating, and yet the noise from the voices that filled it seemed impossibly loud. I sat there, planted in my worn armchair by the window, feeling less like the mother and grandmother I once was, and more like an unwelcome guest in my own home. The curtains barely softened the harsh afternoon sun piercing through the thin fabric, casting distorted shadows over the mess of voices that had nothing to do with me. They were arguing, not about my health, not about my comfort or my needs, but over how they would divide what I had spent a lifetime building. My daughter's voice cut through the air, sharp and brittle. "Mom, you're just a burden now," she said bluntly, barely disguising her impatience. A pit formed in my stomach, something icy that grew colder with each word. This was not the daughter who once clung to my side, who chased after me with questions and laughter. This stranger that used my name with such disregard made my heart palpitate, but not with the love I had known. It was with shock and disbelief. Beside her, my son-in-law smirked, the kind of smirk that spoke of entitlement and disdain. "We're doing you a favor by even sticking around," he sneered, his words dripping with venom disguised as humor. Their laughter echoed, cruel and hollow, like nails scraping on a blackboard. My presence in the room was ignored, as if I were a ghost trapped in the shell of my own body. They bickered over spreadsheets and imagined fortunes, numbers that once symbolized years of sacrifices, now twisted into weapons against me. I closed my eyes briefly, willing myself to not crumple into sobs. The weight of years I carried, the late nights balancing family budgets, the skipped meals so my children could eat, the jobs I took to keep a roof over our heads, all vanished from their minds in that moment. They saw only the frail, aging woman whose relevance had faded like the fading light outside the window. Their plotting went on, laden with the arrogance of youth and greed, voices rising and colliding as if the estate was a treasure chest waiting just for them. My daughter's eyes flicked towards me once, filled with cold calculation instead of love, then quickly averted. I was not their mother in that moment. I was an obstacle, a means to an end, a relic to be discarded when no longer useful. The room spun slightly as the reality settled deeply in my bones. I was utterly betrayed. Not by a stranger or a fleeting friend, but by the very blood that I had nurtured, protected, and sacrificed my all for. The sharp sting of humiliation coursed through my veins, but amid that unbearable hurt, my mind sharpened with an unexpected clarity. This was not the end. It felt like the cruelest kind of beginning. I pulled away silently, retreating to the quiet corner where I could be left alone with the bitter taste of abandonment. Their voices faded into the background, replaced by a stillness that pressed heavily upon my chest. The warmth I once held for my family now simmered beneath the cold surface, transforming into a silent, smoldering resolve I did not yet fully understand. They thought I was broken, diminished. They thought their greed had won. But in that quiet moment, as the door closed softly behind me, I began to gather the shattered pieces of myself. This was humiliation, yes, but it was also a seed planted deep in the fertile soil of my spirit, a seed that, one day soon, would rise in a way they least expected. The quiet room I withdrew to was once a sanctuary, now hollow and heavy with a silence that pressed against my chest as if to suffocate the very breath from me. I lowered myself into the worn armchair beside the window, its fabric familiar beneath my fingers, a steadfast companion through years both joyful and painful. Closing my eyes, I summoned the memories etched into every corner of my life, the countless sacrifices, the moments of fierce love and unwavering hope, and now the bitter sting of betrayal that painted everything in a colder shade. My mind traveled back to those long nights at the office, the steady hum of fluorescent lights above as I pored over blueprints and calculations that few outside my profession could understand. Those hours were not for personal glory. They were a lifeline, a means to provide more than I ever had, a chance for my children to climb higher than their beginnings. Tuition bills stacked like towering peaks, every paycheck a brick laid carefully in the foundation of their futures. I was the silent architect behind their diplomas, the unsung hero of their achievements, the one who worked while they slept. One memory was seared sharp, the last tuition payment for my daughter's final semester. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the checkbook open before me amidst a scattering of bills, the weight of every sacrifice resting on my weary shoulders. That check represented more than just tuition. It was the sum of all the skipped meals, the overtime shifts, the postponed doctor appointments taken to keep us afloat. Watching her graduate had filled me with quiet pride, a pride now twisted by the venom of their ingratitude. Then there was the house. Not just a collection of walls or a place to lay down our heads, but a fortress constructed with love, sweat, and sacrifice. I put my health on hold, dodging medical visits, putting off my own needs to keep those mortgage payments current, fearing the collapse of the fragile balance I worked so hard to sustain. Those walls had once absorbed laughter, sheltering us through storms, but now they seemed cold, echoing with silence and empty promises. The gentle memories of birthday celebrations, shared dinners, and late-night talks now felt tarnished, replaced by a grim tableau of dismissal and disdain. Their voices in that living room had stripped me of the warmth I longed for, leaving an aching void where once there was belonging. And yet, beneath the crushing weight of abandonment, a flame flickered, a quiet fury born of deep injustice. Years of patience and generosity were twisted into chains, binding me in a role I did not accept. Their greed had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my sacrifices for obligation. I felt the familiar sting of being undervalued, dismissed as irrelevant and frail. But within that fire, clarity emerged. My years in engineering taught me to see structure where others saw chaos, to find the weakness beneath surfaces that seemed sturdy. Like inspecting a bridge for cracks, I examined my fractured family with meticulous care. Their arrogance and greed were fractures threatening to tear it all asunder, and I was the keystone holding everything together. I realized they had taken for granted the foundation I forged with every drop of sweat and every sleepless night. They believed their entitlement was absolute, blind to the strength it had taken to keep this family upright. I was no longer just a mother, but a crucial pillar, and they had ignored the very supports that held them high. A worn journal lay nearby, my late husband's, a relic filled with notes on integrity, responsibility, and the quiet power of resolve. His words spoke to me across the years, reminding me that despite their betrayal, I was rooted in strength and dignity. Remembering my own resilience, the countless nights bent over papers, the mornings when fatigue beckoned but determination propelled me forward, ignited a spark. That strength had never left. It had simply been obscured beneath layers of grief and disappointment. As the evening shadows stretched across the dusty floorboards, I let slip a quiet stream of tears. Not an act of weakness, but a release, a cleansing of the sorrow stored deep within. Within those tears, a resolve took shape, not fueled by anger or despair, but by a stoic promise to myself. I reached for my laptop, the tool that would serve as both sword and shield in this fight to come. I began combing through bank statements, financial records, and legal documents, the terrain on which I would exact my silent revenge. Every overlooked loan, every shadow account, every legal loophole was a thread I could pull to unravel their claims and expose their greed. Their ignorance of these complex matters was their undoing. They saw only entitlement, never foresaw the careful precision of the woman they sought to undermine. I would make no rash moves, nor loud accusations. Instead, I would rely on the quiet power of knowledge, strategy, and unwavering resolve. The last rays of the sun slipped away, leaving me in the soft glow of my desk lamp. This was not surrender. It was preparation, A mother's heart, wounded but unbroken, gathering strength to reclaim what was hers with the measured calm only years of endurance could forge. In this quiet room, surrounded by memories and the tools of my trade, I felt the pivot of my fate. The past was carved deep within me, but the future was unwritten, and I would be its architect once more. To them, I was forgotten, diminished, dispensable. But I was preparing to rise, stronger, wiser, and relentless, a testament that no betrayal could ever erase the will to rebuild and reclaim. Morning light crept softly through the curtains, casting faint shadows over the scattered papers and open folders spread across my desk. With deliberate care, I examined every document, every financial statement, every contract, each a thread in the complex web they had woven with greed and carelessness. They believed I was too frail, too detached to notice their schemes, but I was neither. I watched, analyzed, and planned the silent dismantling of their illusions of entitlement, using every ounce of experience and knowledge I had gathered over a lifetime. The insult my daughter had hurled still pricked sharply. The doubt about my mental capacity, more wounding than any harsh word. She disregarded the years I had spent untangling the most intricate of problems, the decades I had invested in ensuring the stability of not just buildings, but our family's future. To be questioned by the very person I had nurtured cut deeper than I expected. Yet indignation was not what fueled me. It was cold, steady resolve, a fire forged in quiet strength rather than noisy rage. That moment of disregard crystallized my determination. I refused to be cast aside as broken or irrelevant. Instead, I chose to reclaim control, to strategize with the precision of an engineer and the calm of someone who has endured far too many trials to be shaken easily. My approach was methodical, deliberate, engineered down to every minute detail. Throughout my career, I learned that sturdy structures are not built on force alone, but on anticipating failures and reinforcing vulnerabilities before they become catastrophic. Now, I applied these principles to the fractured ties at home. In their carelessness, they left cracks, loopholes in agreements, unpaid debts lurking in shadow accounts, and financial missteps waiting to be revealed. I quietly sought the counsel of an old, trusted lawyer, whose wisdom and loyalty had never wavered. Alongside a meticulous financial advisor, we mapped out a strategy that sought not drama but efficiency. We planned asset freezes, contract renegotiations, and the covert transfer of properties to reliable hands. Each move was made deliberately, designed to outmaneuver and unsettle without exposing my hand prematurely. When my daughter attempted to provoke me again with snide accusations, I held my ground with cold, measured refusals. I denied her the reaction she craved. Instead, their access to resources began to constrict in silence. Credit lines evaporated, bills under their names lingered unpaid, and frozen accounts became the norm. Their confusion and alarm became palpable during hushed conversations behind closed doors. They frantically searched for answers, grasping at straws while the walls closed ever tighter around their hopes. Their frantic attempts to regain control were met only with my unwavering composure. Every polite refusal, every calm denial chipped away at the fortress they had built on entitlement and neglect. Their certainty began to falter as they lost grip on what they once thought theirs by birthright. This was justice measured not in anger or uproar, but in patience, intelligence, and deliberate action. Like correcting structural flaws with meticulous calculations, I fortified my position with careful planning that would outlast their impulsive moves. Every calculated step was grounded in memory, of the late nights pulling double shifts, the meals I skipped, the doctor's appointments I delayed, all sacrifices hidden beneath smiles and celebrations. They had scorned the woman who made those sacrifices, but they underestimated the resolve forged through hardship. As the weeks passed, a quiet satisfaction bloomed within me. not of revenge's blinding heat, but of empowerment culled from control regained. The woman they sought to dismiss had transformed, tempered by experience and girded with knowledge. Across the spaces of our fractured family, I witnessed their growing panic and desperation. Their scrambling was a testament to how deeply they had relied on my complacency, how ignorant they were of the strength I still commanded. They had taken for granted the very foundation of their lives. All the while, I remained a steady, silent force, carefully orchestrating the unfolding of their reckoning. The victory I envisioned would not be marked by loud declarations or messy confrontations, but by the slow, inevitable collapse of their arrogance beneath the weight of truth and consequence. I had become the architect not just of buildings long ago, but of my own life's next chapter, one built on resilience, strategy, and unwavering poise. They had underestimated me, dismissed my worth, but they would soon discover the strength that comes with quiet resolve and the deep knowledge that one who has endured betrayal becomes unstoppable. I was rising again, not as the woman they once knew, but as a force shaped by every hardship, every heartbreak, and the precision of a mind sharpened by decades of keen observation and silent tenacity. The documents that lay spread across my desk seemed endless, yet each was a piece of a puzzle I had been quietly piecing together for months. Bank statements, loan agreements, property deeds, tax forms, contracts with vague clauses, and barely remembered legal addendums. All became threads in the tapestry of a strategy poised to undo the greed festering within my family. I treated them not as paper, but as the foundations of a structure, one I intended to disassemble before it could collapse on me. I approached every page with the precision that had shaped my career. I remembered dimly lit rooms, bent-over drafting tables where every line, every measurement mattered, not because they were mere numbers, but because they carried the weight of safety and trust. Now, those skills served a different purpose: to expose cracks and weaknesses where arrogance had allowed my betrayals to fester unchecked for too long. The son-in-law's reckless financial maneuvers drew my attention with surgical precision. Loans guaranteed without consultation, payments long overdue, and promises made on shaky ground. These weren't just mistakes, they were liabilities waiting to be unearthed. I marked each one, an unpaid loan here, an unaccounted expense there, a series of cracks in their supposed fortress. I remembered the countless times I had cautioned against such recklessness. It was a reminder of how far their greed had blinded them to the foundations I had built under their feet. As I scanned through the contracts, I found clauses left unfulfilled, obligations ignored, and terms stretched thin by excuses. These documents, once signed with blind trust, were now battlegrounds for legitimacy and control. Here, in these words, lay the power to strip away their presumptions of entitlement. This was not just a battle fought on paper. It was a campaign waged with time, patience, and an unwavering grasp on reality. I reached out to familiar allies, an old, trusted lawyer whose sense of justice was as sharp as ever, and a financial advisor whose eye missed no detail. We aligned our efforts in hushed meetings and email exchanges, orchestrating a slow, deliberate churn beneath the surface, far from the prying eyes and the noise of their denials. With their assistance, I began the process of reclaiming what was mine. Properties were discreetly transferred into trusted hands, shielding them from the grasp of those who would exploit without care. Contracts were quietly disputed on grounds of breach. Some renegotiated under terms that favored stability, others nullified by their own violation. The silent freezing of bank accounts and the strategic blockade of credit lines left them grasping for control they no longer held. It was a quiet war, no shouts or threats, just the unfurling of a plan as precise and relentless as the ticking of a clock. When my daughter stormed into my room, fury flashing in her eyes, demanding answers and attempting to manipulate me with emotional barbs, I responded with an icy calm that unnerved her. No outbursts, no desperate apologies, only firm refusals and a steely reserve. I denied her the satisfaction of a broken mother, the frustration of a fight. Instead, this calm bred panic, and panic was a luxury they could no longer afford. Behind closed doors, I heard their whispered talks, hushed arguments where trust eroded and desperation surfaced. They fell back on accusations and threats, but each gambit met with the silent implacability of my strategy. The financial freedom they had long taken for granted vanished piece by piece, replaced by mounting bills left unpaid, bank notices they could neither evade nor ignore, and property rights slipping quietly but inexorably from their grip. Despite their growing panic, I remained their adversary cloaked in quiet dignity. The chaos I engineered was not fueled by impulsive anger, but by the steady application of knowledge and experience. It was justice served, not on a platter, but meticulously prepared over time, tempered by all the sacrifices that had been ignored for too long. For every quiet step forward, I carried with me the memories of a life defined by sacrifice. The nights turned into dawns at double shifts, meals skipped so others could eat, health set aside so debts could be paid. For every quiet step forward, I carried with me the memories of a life defined by sacrifice. The nights turned into dawns at double shifts, meals skipped so others could eat, health set aside so debts could be paid. These memories were both my shield and my fuel, reminders of a legacy not just built on brick and mortar, but on love paid in full with hardship and hardship repaid with strength. The satisfaction that grew within me was not like a sudden flame, but more akin to the steady burn of a well-tended fire, warming and steady. Control no longer felt like a distant hope, but a tangible reality, unfolding with each calculated decision. I was no longer the dismissible figure pushed aside, but a strategist whose subtle tactics dismantled the very pillars of entitlement. In the fractured spaces of the family home, I witnessed a tempest of reaction, frantic whispers, tense glances, and forced smiles that barely masked the fear that I controlled far more than they had realized. They scrambled in vain, trying to reclaim what slipped silently through their fingers. Undeniably, I had transformed. Though weariness sometimes crept into my bones, my spirit, carved deep with endurance, remained unbowed and resolute. I was a force forged by the cruelest of fires, shaped by neglect, betrayal, and hardship into an unbreakable will. My daughter and her husband were unraveling before me, exposed by their own hands and my unwavering resolve. Their once secure world gave way to uncertainty and fear as their grasp on our shared past slipped away. Yet I met every attempt to provoke with steadfast calm, my silence a powerful weapon against their desperation. This was not a personal vendetta, but a finely woven plan of justice, guided by intellect and tempered by years of longing for respect and recognition. No loud declaration, no angry outburst would mark my victory. Instead, the gradual untangling of their claims and rights would speak louder than any cry could. I was not merely fighting for control. I was reclaiming my dignity and protecting a legacy built on tireless work and quiet sacrifices. They thought me diminished, forgotten, but I was the architect at last of my own salvation. The slow collapse of their arrogance was inevitable, a natural consequence of the careful design laid beneath their feet by a woman who understood that true power lies not in brute force, but in steady, unwavering determination. This was my greatest blueprint yet, not of steel or concrete, but of resilience, justice, and self-renewal. With each calculated move, I built not only walls to protect, but a foundation for a future defined by strength and earned respect. I stood at the center of this design, not diminished but transformed, unyielding and resolute. The woman they had tried to ignore was rising, as a force shaped by every hardship endured and every betrayal survived, as the master of my own fate and the rightful guardian of my legacy. The first sign appeared subtly, the sudden silence when once the house had buzzed with requests and demands. Weeks before, I had grown accustomed to their calls, their half-hearted smiles when they stopped by just to secure yet another favor, financial or otherwise. But now, that rhythm shifted. Their voices faded, replaced by silence that echoed louder than any confrontation. I began the carefully orchestrated withdrawal of access to resources, a measured and silent cutting off of the ties that had bound them to my goodwill for far too long. Credit cards were quietly canceled or suspended, bank accounts frozen under legal counsel's guidance. Bills started to pile up in their names, but they found no relief through me. The credentials they once used freely were revoked, their access denied not by anger, but by hard, deliberate calculation. It was a cold process, preserved not with malice, but with the implacable resolve of someone who had been betrayed and refused to be victimized further. Each time they knocked on the door seeking help or money, they met with polite, clipped refusals. I kept the tone formal, generic, no place for negotiation or guilt trips. Their confusion was palpable. They whispered in frustration, their composure cracking beneath the weight of realized desperation. My daughter was the first to confront me openly. Her voice, laced with anger and disbelief, accused me of betrayal. She swore I was punishing those who loved me, twisting the knife of abandonment she claimed she endured. But her words fell on ears hardened by years of neglect and disbelief. I replied calmly but firmly, no explanations, no apologies, only the unyielding boundary of my resolve. They could not comprehend the architecture of my plan. To them, I was a stubborn old woman, resistant to change, clinging to pride. But in truth, I was the steady hand at the helm, guiding forces they refused to see. Each legal measure, each financial safeguard was an invisible wall keeping out reliance and abuse. There was no sudden breaking point, only a gradual tightening of constraints. As their access to money withered, so did their confidence. Their attempts grew frantic and disorganized. Calls became urgent, messages sharp and demanding. Yet I remained composed, each answer a brick in the wall imprisoning their entitlement. Their desperation reverberated through the household. Wherever they gathered, whispers of panic replaced casual excuses. They debated strategies to circumvent the barriers I had erected, but every ploy failed against the slow, steady tide of my preparation. Their panic was a storm without direction. Their hurried meetings after my refusals both futile and revealing of their own underestimation. In the days and weeks that followed, I observed the subtle but unmistakable decline in their power within this home. The comfortable lifestyle they had taken for granted slipped away as they were forced to face the consequences of years of parental support consumed without respect. No more sudden requests for loans or last-minute bailouts. Their dependence drained, their security wobbled. Throughout this transformation, I did not desert compassion, though it had been stretched thin and frayed over years of ingratitude. Rather, I cultivated a new kind of strength, a boundary of self-respect and protection radiating through my every action and reply. It was a difficult balance, but necessary. I would not enable their greed, nor would I abandon the values that had shaped me. When one of them sought to blame their plight on misfortune, I responded not with recrimination, but with quiet reminders of responsibility. It was not to humiliate, but to confront the harsh truth. Accountability was overdue. Their frustration mounted, and with it, their attempts to manipulate once more. They tried softening their tones, promising change, or appealing to my vulnerability. I saw through these facades. I was no longer the woman who could be swayed by tears or fleeting remorse. My refusal was firm and consistent, unwavering as a foundation built to withstand storms. Many nights were solitary, reflected in the quiet hum of the house once filled with noise. I found solace in those moments, in the deepening awareness that the dismantling of unhealthy reliance was necessary for true freedom, my freedom as much as theirs. While they struggled with diminished resources and shattered assumptions, I felt the slow, steady rise of power reclaimed, an empowerment born not from spite, but from the restoration of balance. The roles had shifted, the debts of entitlement now clear to them as the obligations I had borne for years. I didn't celebrate their setbacks loudly. Instead, I savored the quiet satisfaction of a careful plan approaching its full fruition. The cold justice of the law and financial prudence was stronger than any accusation or confrontation could be. Their scrambling became more visible. I watched from a distance the growing desperation veiled behind forced smiles and sharp words exchanged in private. They were out of their depths, clinging to a past that had slipped irretrievably away. Through it all, my calm steadiness was unshaken. I had transformed from the woman scorned into a strategist of quiet power. Each refusal, each frozen account, each disputed bill was a testament to resilience, hard-earned and resolute. I reclaimed not just money or property, but dignity lost beneath years of disregard. The house, once a stage of humiliation and disrespect, slowly became a bastion of restored order. My boundaries were clear, my authority renewed. In this new reality, I was neither victim nor bystander. I was the architect of change, the guardian of a future shaped by lessons deeply learned and hard-won strength. Their attempts to regain control grew desperate. Threats were uttered with less conviction. Apologies masked with demand replaced genuine remorse. Yet I held firm, the steel of years embedding itself deeper with every encounter. The silence that followed their failed attempts was not emptiness, but space for healing and renewal. It was a necessary calm after the storm of betrayal and the beginning of a life forged in the fires of justice. I had been stripped by indifference and distrust, but found a new strength born not of flame, but of steady embers glowing fiercely beneath. At last I stood clear and unbowed, the quiet force that had dismantled entitlement piece by piece, building instead a foundation of respect and self-possession that no betrayal could dislodge. Those who had taken without thought now faced the consequence of a mother's unwavering resolve, not with screams, but with silent, unyielding authority. This was my reclamation, my rebirth, and the final affirmation that no one could undermine the worth built by a lifetime of sacrifice. And as the days moved forward, I knew with steady certainty. This was only the beginning of a new chapter, one written not in blood, but in the relentless, quiet strength of justice restored. The day had arrived, a gathering called not in joy, but in quiet purpose. As guests began to enter the home I had meticulously prepared, an undercurrent of tension rippled beneath the familiar faces. It wasn't a simple family reunion. It was a reckoning long overdue. Each step I took toward that moment was the culmination of years spent in silence, sacrifice, and careful plotting. Today, truth would light up the shadows so often ignored. The house was immaculate, bearing the marks of years of care and stubborn resolve. Sunlight streamed gently through the windows. Preserved the original language of a home built on foundations stronger than mere bricks and mortar. It was these foundations I would now reveal, the justice and accountability entwined with those aged walls. Relatives began to arrive, mingling uneasily as legal witnesses quietly settled into seats set aside for them. The undercurrents of speculation and uncertainty filled the air as scattered murmurs wove throughout the gathering. My daughter and son-in-law appeared with confidence, yet beneath practiced smiles flickered a veil of unease. They had not grasped the full extent of what was to come. I greeted everyone with measured warmth, my voice calm and deliberate. There was no anger, no accusation, only the steady certainty of someone who have prepared for this moment with unshakable resolve. Justice would unfold not as spectacle, but as an undeniable unveiling of truth. I began with the evidence, documents carefully gathered and authenticated. Bank statements charting the path of reckless loans guaranteed by my son-in-law, payments neglected, money spent without accountability. Faces shifted as the numbers exposed years of financial neglect and mismanagement. The room grew hushed. Some eyes darted nervously in silent confession. Then, contracts, once assumed secure, revealed violations and uncared-for obligations. Clauses highlighted where promises had been broken, ownership challenged where entitlement had been falsely claimed. These legal truths lay bare the fragile illusion of their perceived rights, smashing the foundation of their arrogance. Legal witnesses nodded quietly, the weight of the evidence underscored by their solemn presence. This was no family squabble, but a controlled and inevitable reckoning. The evidence spoke louder than any words ever could. I presented my case with the clarity of a judge and the precision of an engineer. My voice held neither bitterness nor malice, only the undeniable weight of fact. The confidence once displayed by my daughter faltered, windows to panic shining through the cracks of her poised facade. My son-in-law's usual arrogance was replaced by tight-lipped tension, their combined front unraveling before the documented truth. Finally, the piece that sealed the gathering, the will. Drafted months earlier, legally bound, and favoring causes dear to my late husband and me. This written testament redirected our legacy from personal greed to charitable purpose, dashing the hopes of those who presumed it all theirs by default. The room stilled, breaths held as disbelief sank slowly among the attendees. Gasps and murmurs swept through the room, stark contrast to the demands and claims so brazenly voiced previously. The family name, the once untouchable status, crumbled under the spotlight of meticulous justice. I listened quietly, no triumph boasting in my silence, only the sobering understanding that this justice was decades in the making. The humiliation they now faced was not mine to wield, but the natural consequence of their arrogance and betrayal. Eyes met mine with new respect. Others looked away, the weight of revealed truths too heavy to bear. This was beyond property or inheritance. It was a moral reckoning, an accounting of betrayal and the reclaiming of dignity. As the gathering dissipated, the house settled into peaceful quiet, no longer a stage of tension, but a sanctuary restored by truth and unwavering resolution. I walked through familiar halls, absorbing the profound stillness of triumph not won by force, but by steadfast endurance. My journey spanned countless sacrifices, years unnoticed, nights of toil and worry, all now woven into this moment of reclaimed respect. I was no longer just the quietly hurt matriarch. I was the force reclaiming control of our family's destiny. The victory was not characterized by loud declarations or passionate confrontations, but by the relentless, steady crescendo of justice fulfilled. Looking ahead, I saw a path illuminated by hard-won wisdom and restored honor. While the wounds of betrayal would linger, they no longer dictated the course. The home stood firm, a testament to resilience and the rebirth of rightful order. I whispered to myself as the final visitor departed, a vow sealed within the calm of reclaimed sovereignty. No one can erase what is built on true sacrifice. No greed can overshadow a life lived with integrity. I was, and would always remain, the architect of my own fate, the vigilant guardian of a legacy that endured beyond betrayal and doubt. The days that followed the gathering were marked by an unfamiliar quietness within the house, a silence that spoke not of absence or emptiness, but of a long-awaited peace settling gently in the corners where chaos once reigned. I moved through the rooms with a newfound ease, the weight of distrust and turmoil lifting slowly like mist retreating at dawn. The house, which had long echoed with bitter words and unspoken grievances, now breathed softly with the restoration of order and dignity. Alone yet unshaken, I found solace in the simple routines I once cherished but had long neglected. Morning light streaming through the windows took on a new warmth, and the creak of aged floorboards beneath my feet was a gentle reminder of the life I had painstakingly upheld. Each familiar object, the well-worn armchair by the window, the faded family photographs on the walls, the heirloom clock ticking steadily in the hall, carried with it memories of sacrifice and love no longer overshadowed by bitterness. In these moments of quiet reflection, I understood the true breadth of my journey. It was more than the reclaiming of property or the correction of wrongs. It was the restoration of self, the laying down of burdens I had carried alone for too long. The dignity I had fought to preserve extended beyond material things. It rooted deep within, a testament to resilience and unwavering spirit. I thought often of the many nights spent working beyond exhaustion, the skipped meals and the postponed medical visits, all acts of silent love and steadfast commitment. Those sacrifices, once overlooked and taken for granted, now stood as the foundation of a legacy finally recognized, if not by those who should have honored it, then at least by myself and those who truly understood. The betrayal still lingered in the corners of my heart, a scar etched deep and lasting, but it no longer dictated the rhythm of my days. I had faced the storm and emerged not broken but tempered and strengthened. That strength was no longer a shield against the world, but a quiet flame, steady and enduring, lighting the path forward. The family, fractured though it remained, began to settle into a new dynamic. Though some ties had been irreparably damaged, others found tentative renewal, not through forced forgiveness, but through acknowledgement of truth and the possibility of change. I no longer held the desperate hope of reclaiming what was lost, but welcomed the chance to foster what remained, on new and firmer ground. I embraced my new role, not as a figure of submission or silent suffering, but as a woman who had reclaimed her voice and authority. The boundaries I set were clear and respected, not through fear, but through an unspoken understanding forged by years of unwavering resolve. The house, once a stage for conflict, had become a sanctuary where dignity was restored and protected. In solitude, I often gazed through the window, watching the world move on beyond the walls I had guarded so fiercely. The seasons changed as they always had, indifferent to human strife, yet in their constancy I found comfort. Like the cycles of nature, my own life had passed through harsh winters and blossomed into quiet springs. Whispers of the past came and went, memories tinged with both sorrow and gratitude. I allowed myself moments of gentle mourning for what could never be reclaimed and moments of quiet joy for what had been preserved. With each passing day, the knowledge settled in that my identity was no longer bound to the betrayals endured, but defined by the strength cultivated in their wake. I was the architect not just of a house or a legacy, but of a life rebuilt on foundations of resilience and self-respect. And in that solitude, I made a final vow, not to dwell on losses, but to embrace the future with the same quiet determination that had carried me through every hardship. No longer weighed down by the past, I stepped forward with a sense of peace and purpose, knowing that the true measure of a life is not in what is taken from it, but in what is steadfastly defended and lovingly nurtured. I was free, not from the memories, but from their power over me. And as the sun cast its golden light across the horizon, I whispered to the winds carrying the promise of tomorrow, "This life is mine. I am its unwavering guardian, its rightful architect, and its eternal soul."